Good afternoon, everybody. It's Interfaith Explorers here again this month, and we're having a conversation today about religious literacy in Islam and a particular focus on Shia Islam. So welcome very much and thank you for finding us. As you can see, I have a guest with me and we'll introduce ourselves in a moment for those of you who don't know who either of us are, because obviously they might just know from the look of us. But just to say, on the website, you may have already downloaded the PowerPoint presentation that Syed and I have put together to help you with some information around our conversation. What you can do is you can keep us running and you can open that now and then you don't have to look at our faces. I like to envisage people with the PowerPoint in front of them rather than me. Or you may already have it printed out and you may want to put notes on that or questions as we go through. The other thing is just underneath us, there is a place where you can send in your questions and we would love to hear from you. So particularly if there's something we're talking about and you don't understand it, it's maybe late on a Thursday, you've had a busy day in school, and maybe we aren't being clear enough, then do send those questions in. We have a wonderful assistant at one side who will pass those to us and we will try our best to answer them. And if we can't answer them today, we'll come back to you with some information. So do ask questions. I think I've said this many times, but Plato said his best pupil was Aristotle, and the reason for that was because he was always prepared to ask questions. Exactly. So no question is too silly to ask, and we're not going to get offended with any question because we'll understand it's from that place of you wanting to understand. Okay, so welcome to Interfaith Explorers, and my name's Claire Clinton. I'm an RE advisor, so I love all things to do with religious education, and today we're broadcasting from my office in Newham, and you'll be glad to know that it's a clear day out the window. Just about. We've had snow this week, we've had torrential downpour, we've had beautiful sunshine, and now it's just sort of bright, not totally grey, but not sunny. So welcome. And next to me is Syed. So I'm going to get Syed to introduce himself. So hello, who are you?
Hi. Firstly, thank you very much for having me on this. It's always quite difficult to talk about yourself, but
and look at ourselves, because that's what we're having to do here, is look at ourselves.
Okay, to look at ourselves, try and describe. Okay, so what do I do? Officially, I'm meant to be a senior imam with the responsibility of representing the Shia community, taking care of their needs, whether it's educational or social, welfare-wise, not just in the UK, but in Europe.
Okay.
And so therefore we have probably over 1 million people within Europe that we need to take care of. But hopefully we're providing that centralization and support mechanism. So that's what I do on one side. And the other side is that I lecture on philosophy, theology, and metaphysics.
And where do you do that?
All over the world, actually.
All over the world?
At different universities, different continents.
Brilliant. So we're very fortunate to have Syed with us today. So just to go through our objectives for today, and also to mention that the reason we're here today is because Interfaith Explorers are providing this professional development for teachers, and we're really grateful to them and for all the resources that are on the website. And if you haven't looked at the programme of study on there, and you can use that with upper key stage 2 or at the bottom of key stage 3, then it is worth taking a little bit of time and having a look at the resources there. And so today we're having this discussion about Shia Islam to help us to be able to understand as professionals a little bit more of the context and the understanding of this particular faith or religion, but also so that we can confidently help children to discuss issues in the classroom. Interfaith Explorers is all there in the title, really. We're wanting to see more interfaith conversations happening in schools, and for us, for me as a teacher, for you as a teacher, to not be fearful of stepping into these conversations. And we recognise the fact that teachers have to be mini experts in a lot of things. So we hope today will help you sharpen up your knowledge, or maybe learn some new things today about the Muslim faith. So we're going to start off with some facts about Islam. So a new fact that I learned in researching for today was that Indonesia has the largest population of Muslim people in the world. And Sayed told me that India is the second.
India is the second. Pakistan, Bangladesh.
Yeah, see, having an expert is very helpful. And and I know also that for Muslims, when you're looking at religions across the world, it's the second largest religion. And also in this country, that's also true. But after Christianity, it's the next largest religion. And we were talking actually a little bit about census information, because I looked up the 2011 census, and in that you see that there's 2.8 million Muslims in the UK, and within that it says 5% are Shia. But Sayed and I were talking earlier, before we started broadcasting, about one, I suppose that's 2011 and we're 5 years later, so that makes a big difference. Also, the census can only report on what people choose to say. And of course, some people may choose not to state their religion. They may say they don't want to answer that question. And that could be anybody from any religion or no religion. And so when you get these figures, they're not always giving you precise information. So just tell us a little bit about the community, the Shia community in the UK.
Well, I had a responsibility from 2011 to basically go up and down the country and just investigate as to how many Shias there are and what they're doing in terms of the economics, in terms of the social, educational backgrounds. So from that, we came to the conclusion that there are 103 Shia centres across the country, official centres.
Okay.
Which could, let's say, for example, anywhere in London, on a main night, you could have about 2,000, 2,500 people.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean,
so they're really large centres, and many of you may have sort of Sunni mosques near you, and actually around us here. Sometimes they're places that are converted a shop or a house, and so it may be a mosque or a madrasa or somewhere that's being used for men to come together to pray, but it isn't going to be as large a centre as the ones you're talking about. So it's quite interesting that that's different. Obviously, there are large Sunni centres as well, I was at East London Mosque a couple of Saturdays ago.
That's a very large one.
So that's massive. Like, large is not the word, it's massive, and just goes on. And actually they've just bought up the synagogue that was next door, and are carefully going to use that for some interfaith work. And they were doing that with the Jewish community as well, so that's quite interesting. Anyway, back to Shias in Great Britain.
Yeah, so we're looking at officially 103 centres which are used for mosques purposes of praying. So by definition, a masjid is a place where you go and prostrate your head to God. So it's a place of prayer. And from that, we realise that there has been migration which has taken place in the last decade or so, specifically from war-torn countries. So you've got Afghanistan, you've got Iraq, different parts of the Middle East. And so you have this influx of Muslims who've come in who, for whatever reason, have not come on the census. It could be a fear factor as well, that possibly because they've left countries which were war-torn on the basis of sectarian violence, that they don't want to be identified as Shia or otherwise. So because of that, we realize that there are two ethnic backgrounds which are underrepresented. The first is the Afghans and the other one are the Iraqi community. And they were quite underrepresented. So when we went to the Iraqi embassy to ask, literally it was as if there's that many refugees which are equal to the amount of official Shias that we have in the country.
Really?
So yeah, so it was quite fascinating to see that there are individuals who have come into the country who may not be on that for whatever reason. And it was our, I wouldn't say duty, but just out of interest, just to see how many we do have. So I could say that from that 5%, we're probably looking at 15 to 20% who are Shia.
Okay, so it's quite interesting, isn't it, that sort of difference. Now, Christianity, Judaism and Islam are often called Abrahamic faiths, people of the book, and sometimes Muslims themselves don't. We were doing a quote about fasting has been prescribed to you,
right,
as it has for the people before you.
Yeah.
And I asked a group of Muslims who were the people before you, and none of them thought of the Jews or the Christians.
Really?
Yeah. And I was like, no, they're the people before you. You know, there's fasting there as well. So it's quite interesting that within all these different communities, sometimes people themselves don't know some of the links between their scriptures, linking between some of values that are identical, teachings that are very, very similar. And I think that's really helpful for teachers to know that there are these links there. And so if you've got a classroom of children that are from very diverse religions and beliefs, that interfaith conversations can really help to bring out what is good and what is profitable in different faiths. But also, if you're in a situation where you're in a very mono-religious or more secular place, and we know Great Britain is so different from whether you're in a city or which city to in the countryside, being able to bring in these different voices, and that's where the internet is so useful to us as educators now, that you can bring in snippets of people that you haven't physically got. It's just as important for those children to be able to understand the multi-religious nature of our country. And if we are going to have successful dialogue and literacy around religion, then we've got to get rid of ignorance.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're going to talk for a few minutes now about some of Syed's central beliefs as a Muslim. And these central beliefs, though there are Sunni and Shia, these two main, I would call them denominations within Islam, these central beliefs are true for everybody. You know, you wouldn't know if you were talking necessarily to a Muslim which denomination they were part of, because they're really important central beliefs. And this is the same as if you were talking to a Buddhist or a Sikh or a Hindu or a Christian or a Jew, that when you begin to look at these different groupings, that there are different sets within, but actually there are important teachings and beliefs that everyone agrees with. So what are some of those central things for you as a Muslim?
Well, I think for me, I'd start off with a particular quote, which is exceptionally important, especially in this day and age, that I think it's neglected, and that is, what is Islam essentially? And from our teachings, Islam is really two things. So a holy man was once asked, going back to the time of the Prophet, what is Islam? And they were expecting possibly a 20-hour speech, but it didn't come. It was literally within 15 seconds. Islam, all of Islam, can be put into two things: your duty to God and your duty to humanity.
Right.
And that's what the religion represents.
Yeah.
So to come on to your duty to God, your duty to God, as the core belief is, one of them is proclamation of the one God. So being a monotheistic religion, the first thing is that there is this movement towards believing in this one God, this absolute God. And that has a spiritual meaning, that has an outer meaning. The inner meaning essentially is this, or the spiritual meaning, is that asceticism away from material objects towards appreciation of the one. In the outer sense, it's just the fact that you believe in one God.
Yeah.
So we'll stick to the outer fact, as opposed to going into the spiritual. But then from that adds on the idea of prayer. So the importance of prayer, the idea that we're making a connection with God to humble ourselves. So you're praying to God, you're building that relationship based upon love, based upon compassion. And so the idea is that from this relationship, you become a better person so you can serve humanity. And that's where the idea of prayer comes in. You've got the idea of fasting. You know, what is fasting? Fasting is important. Again, there's a spiritual benefit, but there's an outer benefit. And that is to empathize with people. That's to empathize with the poor. You've got charity, the zakat, in and of itself. So again, it's this movement that you're giving something. You're giving a part of your wealth, and in fact, time can be charity, whereas the tradition says a smile can be charity. So you're giving something to somebody who's underprivileged in whatever way that they may be, just to empathize with them, to show that compassion. Again, you've got going on the Hajj. Hajj is something which is, again, important, and Hajj is difficult, it's not easy.
No.
You know, with all of the different criteria, when you go there, dressed in two pieces, it's extremely hot. You're bunched up together.
So many people.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's an understatement, isn't it? Bunched up together.
3.5 million people. And you've got so many different criteria. You can't cut your hair in that until a particular point. You know, God forbid you step on an ant or something like that. You have to pay almost as a compensation for that. So there's multiple different criteria there, but the purpose is that you're going through difficulty because it symbolizes the difficulty of life. And also you have to be considerate. So if you get angry, there's a problem there because straight away compensation. So you've got to be very careful what you say, who you say to, how you raise your voice. You've got all of these different criteria, but the idea is to be self-aware.
Yeah.
So these are essentially the fundamental beliefs that you ask any Muslim and they'll talk about the Hajj, yes, or charity, yes, or fasting, prayers, belief in the one God. And it's all there to condition you essentially towards becoming selfless, to show that empathy, to develop as a human being, to grow as a human being, the idea of the other. And that's the reason why we've been prescribed these things.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you. Excellent. And in terms of the Quran, which is the holy book, we were having a conversation again before we started broadcasting. The text of that, whether you're Sunni or Shia, is the same. So it's the same holy book, and that's why those central beliefs are exactly the same. So this brings me on to the question that you're all thinking about then. If this is all the same, then why have Sunni and Shia? So a little bit, what does being a Shia Muslim, how does that differ from being a Sunni Muslim? My understanding is it's about authority, a bit like in Christianity, where Catholic Christians would look to see what the Pope says, whereas Protestant Christians would also look to see what their leaders say, but that the Reformation happened to sort of put the Bible more in the centre than a person. It's sort of that. But actually, both of them are doing both of that, because the Pope's not saying anything that's not biblical, but it's that sort of, where do you go? Who do you look at first? Who do you listen to? So what is it for a Shia Muslim in terms of, I suppose, differences from Sunni?
Well, again, it comes down to authority, as you rightly mentioned. But again, it's also the interpretation of the Quran. So there's a tradition by the Prophet that all Muslims believe that when he was leaving this world, he said, I'm leaving behind two weighty things: the Book of God, and according to one tradition, my character, my sunnah. In another tradition, it said my family. So the idea is that one without the other is incomplete, because the Quran requires an enactment or somebody to explain it. It's not easy. 6,500 verses. If you were to read from the beginning to the end, you just wouldn't understand it. So it requires interpretation. And because of which, Shias would believe that the successor to the Prophet needs to be the most learned, the most spiritual, essentially a perfect human being, to be able to interpret the word of God. Again, the difference comes here is that Shias would believe that it's an appointment by God. Shiism being part of the Abrahamic faiths. And if you look back, you have Abraham, who through God appoints his son, whether it's Isaac, whether it's, according to Muslims, Ishmael, Solomon, David. You have, for example, Joseph. So the idea is it's within the family. It's an appointment from God. And you've got Yusha bin Nun, you've got Moses. So in the same way, Shias believe the same thing, that the Prophet in his lifetime appointed a family member of his, who, when the Prophet passed away, he became the leader. Then after that, when he passed away, he'd appointed. And there's an entire chain of 12 imams. Mimics the kind of the 12 tribes, or the idea of the 12 princes in the Old Testament. So the idea is that there are 12, you could say, representatives of the Prophet. One comes after the other. And the purpose of them is to safeguard the religion, to implement the religion that's been delivered by the Prophet, and to act as social, spiritual, political leaders of the community. When it comes to the Sunni denomination, it's slightly different, because obviously they have a form of election or selection where the people got together 3 days after the death of the Prophet and decided to appoint a Khalifa. And so you had a schism straight away. You had those people who supported the family of the Prophet, and you had those people who supported the political leader at the time, who took the governance. And from there onwards, and you found that this schism kind of grew. But I guess it comes down to authority. So there's no difference between God or prayer or fasting, any of those things. The main difference is about succession.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Now you'll see on the PowerPoint, I've also put, or we've put a few slides. I'm looking above me because they're just up here on the wall that you can't see. And talking about schools of theology within Sunni and Shia Islam, because I think it's also important for teachers to understand that when you're making a decision as a Muslim, as you say, you're not just reading the Quran, because there's a context to things. There's a historical context, but there's also a spiritual context. And so if you take a verse out of context, it might lead, as with any other sacred text, you coming up with a theology, coming up with an idea that actually isn't part of the religion, because things obviously can be misread, or things can be taken out of context. And so for Sunni Muslims, there's these main 4 schools of theology, which